Kitty Genovese story. March 13, 1964, Queens, New York, 3:15 in the morning. Kitty Genovese is 28 years old. She's just finished her shift managing a bar in Hollis, parked her red Fiat on Austin Street, and is walking the 100 yards or so to her apartment building on the corner. It's a quiet, residential street. The kind of neighborhood where people have lived in the same building for 20 years and nod to each other in the lobby. Nothing unusual about the night. She never makes it inside. A man named Winston Mosley has followed her from her car. She notices him. She runs. He catches her at the far end of the street and stabs her twice in the back. Kitty screams. Lights come on in the apartment building across the road. A window opens on an upper floor. A neighbor shouts down into the dark, "Leave that girl alone!" Mosley looks up. He looks around. Then he gets back in his car and drives away. Kitty is wounded. She makes her way, slowly, bleeding, around the side of the building and collapses in a doorway. She lies there for the next 35 minutes. No one comes. The next morning, police began piecing together what happened. And 2 weeks later, a story appeared on the front page of the New York Times that would change the course of psychology research for the next 60 years. The headline, 37 who saw murder didn't call the police. The number was later adjusted upward to 38. The story, reported by journalist Martin Gansberg, claimed that 38 neighbors had witnessed the attack, some of the initial assault, some of Mosley's return, some of the final moments in that doorway, and that not one of them had called the police while it was happening. Nearly 40 people, 35 minutes, one young woman dying. The country was shaken. Editorials erupted. Radio programs debated it. Politicians read it into congressional records. How could this happen? What was wrong with people? What was wrong with New York? What was wrong with us? And underneath the outrage, quieter, more private, was a different question. The question people asked themselves in their personal thoughts. Would I have done the same? Two young psychology researchers at Columbia University, named John Darley and Bib Latane, read the Times story. They were not outraged, they were interested, because they thought they could see something in the Genovese case that the editorials were completely missing. Everyone else was treating it as a story about character, about cold, jaded people, about the dehumanizing effect of city life, about moral rot. But Darley and Latane had a different hypothesis. They thought the answer might have nothing to do with character at all. They thought it might be structural. And specifically, they thought the number of witnesses wasn't incidental to the silence. They suspected it was the explanation for it. So they ran an experiment, a simple one on the surface. They brought participants into a laboratory, one at a time, sat them in a room, and told them they'd be having a conversation with other students through an intercom system. Separate rooms, separate intercoms, for privacy. The conversation started normally. Then, a few minutes in, one of the other students, who was actually a pre-recorded voice, began to have what sounded like an epileptic seizure, gasping, becoming incoherent, asking for help. Then, finally, going quiet. But they introduced one variable. Some participants believed they were the only other person on the call. Others believed there were additional people connected who could also hear the same thing happening. The results were immediate and disturbing. When participants believed they were the only witness, 85% of them got up, left the room, and sought help, most of them within the first 60 seconds. When they believed there were 4 other people also listening, only 31% responded, and those who did act waited far longer, sitting with the sound of distress, waiting, hesitating, doing nothing. Same emergency, same person in the same amount of danger, completely different human response, based entirely by whether the listener thought someone else was also aware. Darley and Latane had found what they were looking for. They named the broader phenomenon the bystander effect, and the specific mechanism, the cognitive process by which the presence of others reduces any one individual's sense of personal obligation. They called diffusion of responsibility. Basically, it means you wait for someone else to go first. The logic, if you can call it that, is actually simple. When you're the only witness, the problem is yours. The weight of it sits entirely on your shoulders, but the moment you believe others also know, the responsibility to do something distributes, spreads between you, and in that spreading somehow it all but vanishes, not through cruelty, not through calculation, it just disperses. No one person feels fully responsible, so no one acts with full commitment. You might recognize this feeling, maybe not from a murder but from the slower emergencies, the ones where the problem was visible to everyone and everyone was waiting for someone else to be the one to say something. Now, here is where the story gets complicated and, I'd argue, more interesting. The Kitty Genovese case, as it was reported in 1964, was not entirely accurate. If stories like this are your kind of thing, hitting subscribe takes 2 seconds, and it genuinely helps this channel reach more people. Right, back to the complication. Years of later reporting, including exhaustive research by journalist Kevin Cook, who spent years on the case and wrote a book about it, found significant problems with the Times account. Many of the so-called 38 witnesses heard something, but from their apartments, in the middle of the night, the sounds were ambiguous. A shout, a scream that stopped. Most of them didn't see anything. Many didn't know whether it was an argument, a drunk person, a domestic situation. The attack happened in 2 separate locations, at different times, meaning no single witness saw the whole thing, and at least 2 people did contact police, though those calls were delayed, mishandled, or not followed up on promptly. The clean, damning headline, 38 people watched a woman die and did nothing, was not really what happened. The story that rocked the country was largely a myth. But the psychology it inspired is entirely true, because Darley and Latani's experiments didn't depend on the accuracy of the Genovese account. The phenomenon they measured was real, replicable, consistent across different cultures, different types of emergency, different group sizes. The bystander effect held up in the lab. It has held up in the decades since. The catalyst for the research might have been exaggerated. The research itself was not. The uncomfortable question the story always invited, would I have done the same, still has the same uncomfortable answer. So, what is actually happening in a person's mind in those moments? There are 2 things happening at the time. We've talked about the first one, diffusion of responsibility. The sense of personal obligation shrinks as the number of potential helpers increases. But the second mechanism is subtler and in some ways more unsettling. Psychologists call it pluralistic ignorance, and it works like this. When you encounter an ambiguous situation, and most real emergencies are ambiguous, at least in the first few seconds, you do what humans have always done when they don't know how to read something. You look at the people around you. You use their behavior as information. If others appear calm, unhurried, unmoved, you conclude, it must be fine. It must not be as serious as it looks. Because if it were serious, someone would be doing something. The problem is that everyone in that crowd is doing the exact same thing. Everyone is looking around, seeing apparent calm, and concluding that things are under control. A whole crowd of people, all using each other as evidence that there's nothing to worry about, while every single one of them is privately a bit worried. Many of Kitty Genovese's neighbours, those who did glance out of their windows, saw other lit windows, but did not see anyone making a move or coming out of their houses, and so they concluded, perhaps not even consciously, that it was in hand, that the situation was contained, that whatever had happened was already being addressed. The man who eventually did call the police, after Mosley returned and inflicted the fatal wounds, later told investigators he had sat on the edge of his bed for a long time before picking up the phone. He phoned a friend in another city first, asked what he should do, then called. That is not a monster. That is a person experiencing genuine uncertainty, looking for social confirmation, second-guessing his own read on the events. It is a feeling most of us know, if you're being honest with yourself. Philip Zimbardo, the Stanford psychologist whose book, The Lucifer Effect, is one of the most thorough examinations of why ordinary people fail in moments that demand something of them, spent years arguing that we massively underestimate how much situation shapes what we do. We operate with what he called the fundamental attribution error. We explain other people's behavior through character and our own through circumstance. Those 38 neighbors were callous and selfish, but I, in that same situation, would have acted differently, because I am not like them. Zimbardo's position, and the evidence largely backs him, is that this is one of the most reliably wrong things we believe about ourselves. The architecture of the situation does far more work than we assume. Whether you're alone or with others, whether the emergency is clear or ambiguous, whether responsibility feels explicitly yours, these factors shape what we do, not just in extreme cases, but consistently, measurably, across ordinary life. So where does this actually show up in your life? Probably not on a dark street in Queens, more likely somewhere much more familiar, something that just looks like a normal Tuesday. It's the email thread at work where a problem is clearly developing, a miscommunication, a deadline slipping, a client being managed badly because of a toxic manager, and everyone on the chain can see it, and no one says anything, because the thread has 15 people on it, and 15 people feels like enough cover that someone else must be handling it. It's the group chat where a friend goes noticeably quiet, where the messages they do send have a different texture to them, where something is off, and more than one person has privately noticed. So there are side chats and concerned phone calls, but nobody calls the friend directly, because the group is large enough that surely someone else is in closer contact, someone else knows what's going on, someone else will check in. It's the meeting where a decision is being made that everyone in the room can feel is wrong, where the discomfort is visible on faces, and no one speaks. Not because they don't care, and not because they're cowards, but because a full room in that moment functions as permission to stay silent. Everyone else is quiet. Quietness must be the right response. The bystander effect does not require 38 people. Research has found it operating in groups of 3. It works in a committee of 5. It works in a family WhatsApp group with 8 members. But knowing this doesn't automatically fix it. Latani's own later research found that awareness of the effect only marginally improves response rates, but it doesn't eliminate the pull to relax once people believed the responsibility is shared. The diffusion is structural. It operates below the level of what you actually believe about yourself, which is what makes the closing question difficult. If the situation shapes you more reliably than your character does, if being in a crowd is enough to suppress the instinct you believe you have, then what do you make of the times you've already been in that crowd? The thread you didn't respond to, the check-in you assumed someone else would make, the meeting where you stayed quiet. Were those failures of character, or were you simply standing in the wrong configuration of people? I don't have a clean answer. I'm not sure there is one. Thank you for spending time with this one. It's a story I found hard to sit with, and I think that discomfort is the point of it. Leave your answer to that last question in the comments. I mean that genuinely. I'd like to read it. Like this video if the story made you think, and subscribe if you want more. I'll see you in the next one.